Welcome to the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
I know that there are other bigger, more important things happening in the world today, i.e. some of the stuff going on politically that we often talk about on this podcast with my good buddies in the political world, or at least the political media world. But I'm going to be honest with you, I need a break from some of that more often these days, maybe than ever before, simply because of what happened during the recent debate and the way my guy performed. And combine that with the fact that I've been on vacation for about 2 weeks and I'm taking a couple more vacation days the rest of this week. I'm just sort of in midsummer vacation mode before things really start to crack down in terms of politics. And the other thing I cover extensively for the forum, football, Bison football specifically. And so because of that, those are my excuses. We're going to take today's podcast and make it into sort of a general midsummer Bison football update, recruiting update, FCS update, and just kind of have some fun with our good friend Eric Peterson, my colleague for, about 30 years now at the forum. Hello, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mike. It's it's kind of that. We're in that midsummer limbo. You've kind of, all the early summer stuff is over. The 4th of July is done. Now we're like, 5 weeks out from the start of football?
I think 50 days. I was watching Izzo's program. We're recording this on Wednesday, July 10th. And Dom Izzo's television program, which, by the way, is coming from Las Vegas, Nevada, as he covers Big 12 Media Days, because Colorado, NDSU's Week 1 opponent, is going to be represented by Deion Sanders, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, etc. And Dom wanted to get some stuff there. Dom said 50 days till the first college football game.
Well, I'm
50 days.
I'm just talking start of camp.
Oh, practices. God, yeah.
Yeah. We're like
3 weeks, right?
4, maybe 4. Is it? Whatever.
I mean, August 1st is 3 weeks away. I mean, so.
Oh, it is August 1st. Yeah. Well,
I don't know, but it's going to be somewhere in there.
Yeah. Summer's over, basically.
But the truth is that it is because of Big 12 Media Days, because there are now betting odds out on some of the Week 1 games. It does start to feel like college football is getting closer and closer. I mean, and I don't know if this is just because, we cover North Dakota State and it's sort of become a year-round thing that I mean, there's really no off-season anymore covering Bison football. And so it just kind of feels like we're ramping up to the season.
College football's almost turned into what the NFL is. There's the season, and there's a transfer portal season. Now the recruiting season seems to be heavily in June and July. Now you have the new realignment, which has people, what's college football going to look like next year with all the power conferences shuffling around? No more Pac-12 as we know it. Something you probably...
NIL.
Yeah, something on your radar. The NCAA 25 football game just came out this week, or is
huge.
coming out. Oh. I mean, that's yeah.
I've been reading up on that like crazy.
But anyway, it's been gone for a decade, and all the video gamer college fans... I used to be one of them. I'm just not going to buy a brand new gaming system to play one game, so I'll probably just stick with the old NCAA 14. So that's neither here nor there.
So we're going to get into some Bison recruiting chat in a bit here, but my column this morning, the McFeely's tip sheet, by the way, which started off as Mac's tip sheet, just as kind of a fun little twist, kind of using my last name but that kind of got shot down in one of our meetings by some of the honchos here because they were wondering who Mac was, and I thought, well, it's sort of self-evident. But anyway, it's now McFeely's tip sheet. There are odds out for college football, Week 1 games, and take them for what they're worth. I mean, do we really know in the transfer portal era what some of these FCS teams are going to look like on August 29th or August 31st or September 1st or whatever? I don't think that we do. But I'm going to throw some odds at you or some betting lines and get your reaction to some of them. And maybe they're legit, maybe they're not, again, because we don't know. I mean, do we really know what Chattanooga's going to look like?
I think it was hard enough to set lines, week one games when you had stable rosters. Now, like, even if you're loaded with talent, you don't know how it's going to be week one. Maybe you'll be a great team by week 3 and not very good by week 1 because of continuity's sake. But anyway,
we're in a world where betting and gambling is just out in the open now. I mean, again, Big 12 Media Days and Mountain West Media Days beginning tomorrow are in Las Vegas, Nevada. I mean, that would have never happened. And 5 years ago.
And all these pro leagues wag their fingers when people bet on their games, and I get why, but yet ESPN bet. I mean, they're
all making gajillion dollars from all these.
Yeah, how many advertisements do they have on their broadcast? So I think that's a little disingenuous.
I mean,
but anyway.
The pregame and postgame shows now talk about gambling. I mean, that would have never happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It just wouldn't have. They would have couched it like Brett Musburger
or Jimmy the Greek back in the
Michaels
day.
And Jimmy the Greek back in the days would sort of, wink, wink, nudge, nudge about the gambling stuff. But now they literally just talk about the lines.
Yeah, there's no wink, wink, nudge, nudge anymore.
Just give us the paycheck and we'll talk about it. So,
anyway.
Okay. The game that everybody around here is looking at, NDSU at Colorado, Thursday, August 29th. In Boulder, obviously, national TV game. The Bison, a team that we think is going to be pretty good in FCS, although I don't think it's going to be a powerhouse team in my opinion, but I think they're going to be in the mix for national championship against Colorado, a team that just takes all the oxygen out of every room it's in. We think is better than they were last year because Deion Sanders, the head coach, has gotten a bunch of guys in the transfer portal on both sides of the ball on the defensive and offensive lines. We know about their skill players. They're really good. Colorado's favored by 8.5 points over North Dakota State. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Seems about right. I mean, 8.5 seems like, they don't want to make it a touchdown favorite. They don't want to make it a 2-touchdown favorite. Let's just put it at 8.5 and see where the public goes with this. It just seems like a feeler line, 8.5. Like what?
Yeah, and
it's just kind of that mid-range. All right, let's see which way the betting public goes with this.
If you had to bet $100, which way would you go? If the line's 8.5, which way would you go? I would go Colorado. I'd take Colorado.
I still would. I think Colorado probably wins by 10 to 14 points, maybe more. The thing. With NDSU, they have a lot of veterans back. They do have a lot of guys back on defense, which I think bodes well. What they don't have, which I think they've had in every other FBS win they've had or Power 5 win they had, is a pretty established offensive line. I don't think NDSU has I'm not saying they can't be good, but I just think there's more questions along the offensive line going into this year. It's not like loaded with NFL guys. I mean, Gray Zabel, probably one NFL guy. Mason Miller, really good college player. Was Fraley at center.
We think?
Yeah, we think.
I mean, we don't know.
So basically, we got 2 guys that we know about, 2 known commodities, and then there's going to be 3 spots where, Hunter Pontius and Jake Rock and some of the young, we just don't know.
There's 3 redshirt freshmen we know that Tim Polasek really likes after spring ball, but we just don't know. And that's, I'll say this, is that, again, on Don Izzo's television program this morning, former NDSU head coach Chris Kleiman, now at Kansas State, was talking about that game. And when Dom asked him about what he thought, broad 10,000-foot view, the first thing out of Kleiman's mouth was, that's going to be a big challenge. Mm-hmm. And his point was that whatever questions Colorado has, and this is where I'm at too, by the way, which I've been saying for weeks and months, is that no matter what the questions are for Colorado at the lines of scrimmage, the skill players they have, Shedeur Sanders is legit, Travis Hunter's legit. They're going to have guys that can run. They're going to have guys that are going to get open. The speed is going to be an issue for North Dakota State. So that's why I'm not very bullish on NDSU pulling this upset.
Well, and that's why I go back to the offensive line. I think in past matchups where they've been maybe overmatched or have a lesser, the FBS team has the edge in athleticism, which you'd expect. NDSU can go on those 10, 12, 6,
14
7 minute
play
drives. And then,
right.
if Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter are sitting on the sideline,
correct,
they're not doing anything.
Right.
So that's why, to me, that's why the offensive line is key in this. But two, I don't know if they've faced a more talented quarterback receiver combo in any of their previous.
Yeah,
I mean, as a combo, maybe individually, but like quarterback receiver.
The closest would be Arizona a couple of years ago. They had some good receivers. Arizona turned out to be a pretty good team than last year. They were good.
No, they were good. But what I'm saying, Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter could be like first round draft pick good.
Yeah.
That's what I just don't think they've seen that level. Yeah.
I didn't say that they're as good. I said the closest they've been. And NDSU had trouble with that.
Yeah.
Is my point. And I think it was a better offensive line NDSU had in that game against Arizona.
And Hunter Lipke, and we can go down the list of other things they had. But I think, and another area where NDSU is unproven right now, they're okay at safety, well, pretty good at safety with Cole Wisniewski, but they're going to have young corners. Are we going to see Najee Nelson and Marquise Alexander playing Travis Hunter and whoever Colorado's brought in?
It's going to be a challenge for North Dakota State.
So
I just think
that would be my thing. If NDSU had an offensive line and even an established running back. I mean, the running backs are good, but there's no Hunter Lipke, there's no John Crockett, there's no all right, I can see this guy running for 150 yards. I can see NDSU having the ball for 35 to 40 minutes, and maybe Colorado gets frustrated because they don't have the ball. I don't see that recipe there, and that's why I agree with you. I think I would lean towards Colorado by double digits at this point.
All right, here's a bunch more. We'll go quickly over these because they don't involve the local squad. Oklahoma State favored by 8.5 over South Dakota State. And I think actually that line just kind of shows that so far the bookies or the odds makers think that South Dakota State's just going to be a better team than North Dakota State because Oklahoma State's legitimately going to be good this year. Colorado's a lot of questions there. Mm-hmm. Oklahoma State is picked to finish third in the Big 12. They have 1,000 guys back on offense, especially their offensive line. But South Dakota State's only, in my view, an 8.5 point underdog.
I think that's the feeler line, like 8.5. Like, it seems like the bookies want to see where the betting public's going to go. I will push back a little bit. Colorado is not as good as Oklahoma State, but Colorado has the name. So they're like the Lakers. They get I feel like they get the benefit of the doubt how good they are based on their name. Deion Sanders, Colorado. Yep. I think in some ways the betting public or the people in general want to think that Colorado is going to be good.
Yep.
Even though that might not be. I mean, we're talking about in the big scheme of their league. Obviously, I think they're more talented than NDSU, but I think people want Colorado to be good or want to think they're good because of Deion and Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter and all these transfers they're bringing in. But to me, if South Dakota State can replace some other guys on the offensive line and defensive line and find some they lost some good targets too.
Yes.
The Yankee twins, they lost Isaiah Davis, they lost Zach Hines, their tight end.
Hines,
but they do have Mark Gronowski. So if they can just kind of reload, they're going to have a chance. But again, that's going to be for everything that South Dakota State has done. They don't really have that trademark FBS victory yet on their resume for them. Like
they beat their only FBS win is Colorado State a couple of years ago, but Colorado State was a bad Mountain West team. So they don't have everything South Dakota State is doing. I think in the back of their minds, or maybe even in the middle of their minds, they want to do what North Dakota State has done, right? They got the Target Field game. They've won back-to-back. They want to win 3.
They want an undefeated championship season in there. Now they're getting a lot of NFL guys.
They're getting NFL guys. I think that they would love to get an FBS Power 5, Power 4 now, victory over legit school to say, look, we did that too. This is going to be a tough game for the Jacks. I think they can win it because Oklahoma State is Oklahoma State. They just seem to have clunkers because they're Oklahoma State. But going to be a tough one for the Jacks. I actually kind of like that line where it's at, but it's going to move up and down. Montana State, a 4.5 point favorite over New Mexico, a bad Mountain West team. No surprise.
No,
I don't disagree.
No.
Tennessee, 41.5 point favorite over Chattanooga, which is like the 10th ranked preseason team in FCS. We know nothing about Chattanooga. We know Tennessee is
Tennessee.
An SEC program that's going to have a zillion athletes. I mean, okay.
I wouldn't bet that line. I mean, even if Tennessee rolls them, which I think that you just don't know how the head coach is going to handle it.
Yes.
Do they just let off the gas and win by 30? I would not even touch a line like that. Sorry. I don't bet anyway, but I would, if I did, I would not even touch a line like that.
Here's one with North Dakota. Iowa State favored by 27.5 over North Dakota.
It seems about right. UND's got a lot of questions, and I think Iowa State feels like they're going to be pretty good.
They'll be a pretty solid
they got some
upper middle of the pack Big 12 team, I think. I mean, Matt Campbell does a good job. They're never going to be terrible. They have a bunch of guys coming back.
But UND is going to have a new quarterback. They lost 2 or 3 really good offensive linemen that could have been back.
Defensive line has got some questions. They have questions at about the 3 most important things you could have questions at, which is offensive line, defensive line, quarterback. I mean, I don't know 3 more. You can have questions at receiver. You can have questions at running back. You can have questions at safety. You can't have questions at offensive line, defensive line, and quarterback all at the same time.
And, for the most part, there might be an exception or two in there. You look at NDSU's FBS or Power 5 wins. Look who the quarterbacks were in those games.
Brock Jensen, Carson Wentz, Easton Stick, Cam Miller.
Cam Miller, yes. It was Trey Lance. They never got the Oregon. So my point is, and they didn't win the Arizona game, but they were in it.
They were in it. They probably
so my
should've.
point is, UND is going to have someone making their first college start in that game. I just think if you're going to be an FCS team beating a decent, at a high-level FBS program in a power conference, you need to have good quarterback play. And I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying start one. I guess the outlier wasn't that Carson Wentz's first start, Iowa State.
It was, yes. But
he's Carson Wentz. So anyway,
with all due respect to Trey Feeney and Jerry Kaminsky, I don't think they're Carson Wentz talent-wise. But I mean, UND will be fine. They're an upper, top 20 FCS team. They always play hard. They're always well coached. They're fundamentally sound, and that goes a long way in college football. But I just don't think they're going to have the horses to beat Iowa State, or maybe even stay close to Iowa State in the first game of the year. Last 2 are Ole Miss 42.5 over Furman, which is the 15th ranked team in FCS, and Oregon 43.5 over Idaho, which is a 7th ranked team in FCS. I just don't. I mean, who knows? I mean,
well, the thing is, I know it doesn't look good for FCS when these ranked teams, but I will say the caveat is those teams are just pillaged by the transfer portal. Idaho lost their 6 young good players are gone.
Yep.
So
Jason Eck, the head coach, I think is pretty good at working the portal too. So, but it's the first game, and they've lost their quarterback, who was pretty good.
But what I'm saying, if they bring those 6 or 7 guys back, they're probably a pretty good team. Maybe that's a 14-pointer. Maybe it's a more. I'm just saying the FCS, it's just going to be harder and harder to be good consistently, or be good to start seasons, because your roster is just going to be turned over. And it'll be happen at the higher level, but they're just going to be turning over the roster with just way more talent. So if neither side has continuity, the team that has more talent is going to win out. In the past, when FCS teams have been able to beat an FBS team or a high major, it's because they've had probably a team together 3 or 4 years, or a quarterback who's a 3-year starter, or an offensive line that's been together for 3 or 4 years. That just probably isn't going to happen very much moving forward anymore.
That's probably a fair way to look at it. Speaking of keeping teams together and depth and all of those things, let's switch to recruiting for the last half of the podcast here and hit on some North Dakota State recruiting. You help Dom Izzo sort of keep abreast of what's going on with NDSU football recruiting. You talk to some of these kids. You talk the back channels to kind of find out what's going on behind the scenes a little bit. NDSU to this point, and it's going to slow down. Maybe it's done. I don't know. But NDSU, as of July 10, has 26 commitments. Not all are scholarship kids. There's been some preferred walk-ons. Not all are full scholarship kids. There's FCS, you can split your scholarships. So NDSU has 26 kids.
That we know of, because there maybe is a commitment out there who hasn't announced it. I always like to couch it like that, just to be,
Yep. And let me say this, and we're going to get into this a little bit more later, because you need always to address this too when it comes to recruiting, but none of these kids have signed on the dotted line yet for any school.
No.
That goes for Minnesota Gophers, South Dakota State Jackrabbits, Iowa State Cyclones, Nebraska Huskers, UND Hawks, NDSU Bison. None of the kids have signed. They have verbally committed, so they are not beholden to come to NDSU or anyplace else until they do in December, when they actually sign.
December 4th through the 6th is the early signing window this year.
Okay. All right. So, generally speaking, 10,000-foot view, what do you think of North Dakota State's recruiting class of 2025 with what we know, which frankly ain't much?
Well, here's what I'll get to. I asked Matt Entz, who's the previous head coach, who's now moved on to USC, with the transfer portal, would that allow FCS teams a chance to get maybe a little bit higher level high school prospect? Why I asked that question is because with the portal, if you're at Alabama, if you're at Ohio State, Iowa State, Kansas State, wherever, if you need to fill a gap, you just go get a portal guy who's been in an FCS program, another FBS program for 2 or 3 years, fill that gap. I mean, they're still going to recruit the 4-star, the 5-star recruits, but does that leave like a mid-range?
Does that leave more 3-star guys available to FCS schools that can get them?
And on paper, it looks like that might be happening at NDSU. I'll also couch that like, are just more 3-star, do recruiting services just give people more 3-star ratings than before?
I was going to say,
I don't know that either.
I don't mean to knock our friends who work at 247 Sports or whatever it's called, but who's making those determinations?
Yes.
I mean, who's saying they're 3-star kids and who's saying they're 2-star kids? I just don't know. I don't. I'm not a recruiting expert. I'm not scouring high school film to look at kids. We're taking it at face value that a kid is a 3-star kid.
And in the end, what's the difference between a 2 and a 3-star? I mean,
1 star.
No, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm just guessing once you get past the high-end prospect, it gets
like
really
the kids at Ohio State and Alabama are fighting for.
Yeah. So that said, to this point, NDSU has, according to 247 Sports ratings, which we usually look at, there's a number of other ones out there, Rivals, a bunch of different ones. I think On3, maybe they're more basketball specific, but they all have their stars. And NDSU has 12 3-star recruits, for what that's worth. So maybe that leads you to believe they are getting a little bit. It's not like they're getting 4 and 5-star guys. I mean, that's not going to happen.
No.
But it seems they're getting a little bit more into that 3-star range in the past. And if you look at and that's the other thing, does a guy become a 3-star recruit just because like Notre Dame offers him or whoever offers him, and then, oh wait, we had him at a 2-star, we'll make him a 3-star.
If a kid has 1 offer from Boise State and 7 offers from Missouri Valley Conference schools, does that make him, does he go from a 2 to a 3-star because Boise State offered him?
Yes. But anyway, from that perspective, it looks like they've got a pretty solid class. Other trends, not like trends, but things that don't surprise me. It looks like now they've got like 5 guys out of Wisconsin. Tim Polasek is entrenched in Wisconsin.
He's from Wisconsin, yep.
That doesn't surprise me. They've hit that pretty hard. I've noticed, they've gone into Missouri, Kansas City area before, but it seems they're getting a few more guys out of there. Devin Kleiman from Kansas State.
He's now an assistant at North Dakota State.
And, they're doing pretty well. I think they got 6 or 7 guys out of Minnesota, the Twin Cities area, and beyond a little bit. And Grant Olson's a name I hear come up a lot when I've interviewed those type of recruits. So it seems like, so anytime you go into recruiting, if you see like, why are they going here or there? Just look at the coaching staff. Like, look at the assistants. Where are they from? Where are their roots? And that can kind of...
And each coach is assigned a general geographic area. Randy Hedberg recruits North Dakota for North Dakota State. Devin Kleiman now has that Missouri, Kansas area. Tyler Roll used to have South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, I believe. He was all over the place down there.
So It seems like it's they're branching out a little bit. There's a couple Florida kids in there. There's a couple Texas kids in there. Obviously, the NDSU going to Frisco all those years seems to be still they're plucking a couple guys out of there. Not a lot.
High school coaches down there. Yep.
And we've had talks, with Matt Entz or other people behind the scenes, and we're like, in the portal area, do you want to tighten your footprint? Do you not want to go to people farther away from home because maybe they're more apt to transfer? And that's just obviously someone who's a good player from Minnesota becomes really good, he might want to transfer to the Gophers after 2 seasons. So it's not like that's an end-all be-all, but it still seems they want to go down into Florida a little bit. They want to go down into Texas a little bit. But if you look at it, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, maybe even Missouri seems, the Midwest to upper Midwest
Iowa
is still their tight footprint. Yeah, they go into Iowa quite a bit. So, but the other thing, 26. We're early July. It was plus 20 by the end of June. It just seems like, and maybe this is another portal thing. Maybe there's less opportunities for guys coming out of high school scholarship-wise, so they feel like if I got an offer mid-June and I like that school, I'm taking it because that seat might not be there in 6 or 7 days.
Yeah.
So I think that might be driving this early, or it seems to be these earlier commitments. And like you said, these are all verbals. I would guess there might be one or two that may decommit by the end. It seems to always happen. Last year, NDSU had their quarterback recruit, Ryan Bowe, ended up going to Northwestern.
Yep.
They had a defensive line prospect, I think his name was Kyan Payne. Kansas State came in late and got him. So it just
a running back who out of the Twin Cities ended up going to South Dakota State,
and I think a safety who ended up walking on at Iowa.
Yes.
So it's just going to happen. You're just, and maybe that's what. I'm sure Polisic isn't hoping to lose guys, but he's probably thinking, all right, we got 26 commitments. Even if we lose a few,
if we get to the finish line with
22,
with 22 or 21, we're doing in good shape. To that end, getting to specifics, a couple of kids I think to keep an eye on. Not that they're. I don't have any information at all, but I just know what bigger programs, what every college football program, not bigger programs, every college football program is looking for offensive linemen. That they are the gold standard in the transfer portal era and the recruiting era of what these schools are looking for. And the Bison got a couple of good 3-stars in Ryan Bobbitz, Babatz. Ryan, I apologize if I mispronounced your last name, and Alex Warden. You have the list in front of you where they're from, but those are a couple of offensive linemen and other players as well that, these bigger schools they don't stop recruiting these kids just because they verbally commit someplace. And it goes for every school. South Dakota State recruits right now are getting bombarded as well by bigger schools, and it's going to intensify the closer we get to signing day. If a Iowa or a Minnesota or a Nebraska or an Iowa State decides, we need a couple more offensive linemen or one more offensive lineman, then we're going to find out. We're going to look at North Dakota State. We're going to look at South Dakota State, and we're going to try to flip some of those kids. So that's just a couple real good offensive line prospects that North Dakota State locked down so far that are, they're good. They're good athletes. They're good kids. And so just.
I'll throw that. So Ryan Bobbitz is from Wisconsin, Bayport. Alex Warden is from Wisconsin, Bayport High School. Ryan Bobbitz is from Buffalo, Minnesota High School. They also, I think, their first commit was also a 3-star recruit, Gavin Wang from Annandale High School in Minnesota. His dad, Ryan Wang, was a basketball player at Central Cass and North Dakota State College of Science. The kid's 6'7", 250-pound range. And then actually, I think another one, I don't know if he was a 3-star recruit, but James Nellis out of Grafton High School, again, Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin,
He had an offer from Washington State. While they're not the Pac-12 anymore, it's still Washington State. So it seems like they've got a pretty good group of sought-after offensive linemen in this class.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's their bread and butter. And I'm sure they can point to Cody Mauk and Dylan Radins and Cordell Volson and Billy Turner and whoever.
Nash Jensen, the list goes on.
If you come here, we can,
You can get to the NFL from here, if that's what you want to do. You can get to the NFL from here.
But the counter from the power, well, you can get the NFL from here and get $500,000 if you're really good. So that's the other thing that gets thrown into this mix.
Well, right. And that's, the other thing is, so there's 26 kids that have so far verbally committed. In the old days, maybe, 15 of those kids would spend 5 years at North Dakota State, right? I mean, how many of these 26 in the transfer portal era are going to spend 5 years at North Dakota State?
You'd probably hope 10.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Unless they're just a bunch of duds, which you have to assume that coaches and a lot of these kids had multiple Division I offers, multiple FBS offers, and again, there's 3 stars. So I mean, they're obviously sought after kids. But again, in the transfer portal era, all these big schools are looking at offensive and defensive linemen, and so. I'm not being negative. I'm just being honest. I'm not. I mean,
and another. Sorry to kind of pick. The other trend I'm seeing is some of these defensive players. I'm seeing the defensive line recruits specifically. I'm seeing 6'4", 220, 6'4", 6'5". It seems like they're trying to get longer frames, to use a buzzword.
Yes.
And then they also have this linebacker, a walk-on from Maple Grove High School. And the reason I bring him up is he had walk-on offers, I believe, from Kansas State and Notre Dame. And he chose NDSU as a preferred walk-on. And he's another guy. He mentioned Grant Nelson. He's 6'3", 215. He wanted to play middle linebacker. I think NDSU is going to give him a chance to play middle linebacker.
Olsen.
Yeah, sorry, Grant Olson. Grant Nelson,
Speaking
Grant
of
Olson.
length.
Yeah, he could play offensive tackle or so. But I talked to the kid, and I think he said, Notre Dame probably, I could walk on there, but I'm sure going to Notre Dame isn't exactly cheap.
No.
And then
But the way those big schools do it now, though, and this, I think I've heard through the grapevine, this was the case. You mentioned the kid earlier that North Dakota State lost to Iowa last year as a walk-on.
Yep.
These big schools now with NIL, they just make up they say, okay, our tuition and books and cost of attendance to go to Notre Dame, for example, is $75,000 a year. So miraculously, we're going to give you $75,000 a year in NIL.
But at that point, if you're a walk-on, though, at that point, if you're going to do that for the kid, why don't you just offer him a scholarship? Maybe it's just a way to add more scholarship players.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like kind of
that's what they're doing now.
Quote-unquote free scholarships. Yeah. Yep. So that was another thing I found interesting. In North Dakota, North Dakota was weird this year for NDSU because the real good guys just got too good for them. Like Riley Sunram committed to the Gophers.
Yeah, the kid out of Bismarck.
The kid out of Bismarck was Iowa State.
Yep, I can't think of his name. I apologize.
Schaefer, is it?
Yes. Yep.
God, Schaefer. And is it John Schaefer?
No, but it's Schaefer. You're right.
Sorry. And then Kyle Pietzrak.
Cade
Pietzrak from West Fargo, Cheyenne. He's got about every power.
Yeah.
But for I guess the guys that NDSU could realistically think they could get, they got Walker Broughton, who's probably, I don't know how the top FCS level prospect out of North Dakota. He plays quarterback and safety. He's going to play safety at NDSU. He was recruited by some schools to play quarterback, but he's fine playing safety. NDSU did get their quarterback Xander Smith out of Florida, 6'4", 220-pound kid. They got another kid.
They offered some kids that ended up at higher level schools. I think they offered 4 of their kids that ended up going to either a Power 5 or a Group of 5 program.
Yeah, I think a kid out of Wyoming they're in on, but he's from Wyoming and went to Wyoming. Yeah. Preston Brown is another quarterback prospect out of Hillsborough High School in Missouri, but from talking to him, he sounds like he's fine with moving to safety, and actually said Wyoming recruiting him as a safety. Mm-hmm. So it must be he was a dual threat guy, threw the ball pretty well, ran for over 1,000 yards. So He's kind of like maybe a James Hendricks type guy. Like, all right, well, maybe he's good enough to be a quarterback, but more likely I could see him probably ending up at safety, especially if the Xander Smith seems to be their top target at quarterback in this class.
He seems to be the best. Yes. Yeah. The best they got. Again, they offered. I'm not knocking the kid, but they offered 4 other kids. So we don't know where any of these kids ranked on their chalkboard.
Just because I like tight ends, Gabriel Cunningham out of Missouri, out of Holt High School.
Let's stop there a second. A couple things before we just burn through names. Couple things. You mentioned that the top prospects out of North Dakota went elsewhere. They went to bigger schools. And that's something that is maybe different than 10 to 15 years ago. And North Dakota State fans have to realize that there was a time not that long ago when these bigger schools weren't in North Dakota looking for these kids, right?
Yes.
Riley Sunram would have gone to North Dakota State 15 years ago because there wouldn't have been 25 Power 5 schools looking at him. And that's something that somebody from North Dakota State, one of the coaches in previous years mentioned to me was, people want things to be the way they were in terms of dominance of North Dakota State. And just a cautionary tale is 15 years ago, probably all 3 of those kids possibly that left North Dakota to go to a Power 5 school maybe would have been going to North Dakota State. I mean, so that's a difference now is that Matt Entz, before he left Fargo, we were talking about some of this stuff, and Matt Entz said, Mike, just stop and think about this for a second. The University of Miami, the one in Florida, not the one in Ohio, Miami offered a young man from Kindred, North Dakota. He goes, just stop and think about that for a second. Miami offered a kid from Kindred.
Okay, just to clean up a few things we did mess up. Cade Pizzerak, West Fargo Cheyenne. He's a 6'4", 250-pound offensive line prospect. I mean, he's got Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Kansas State, Arizona State, kind of amplifying your point. It is Jack Schaefer from Bismarck High School,
that's right. Yep.
A 6'6", 315-pound offensive lineman prospect. He's going to Iowa State. And then Riley Sunram, like you said, he had everybody offer him, not everybody, but a lot of power schools offered him. And then Walker Broughton, who's another 3-star recruit, ends up in North Dakota. But to your point about people coming into North Dakota, well, one, now like a place like Miami is, but then the coaching tree that NDSU has built, Matt Entz is at USC now, David Braun's at Northwestern, Chris Kleiman's at Kansas State, Brett Vegan's at Montana State. Not that Montana State's come in here, but even with Wyoming, you had the Craig Bowl connection. You have all this coaching tree that's expanding, and coaches who've been here like, well, I could go to North Dakota and maybe get a pretty good offensive lineman prospect.
Right.
And I think that's part of it.
And another part of it that Entz mentioned was, Matt Rule at Nebraska knows what he's doing. Yeah. I mean, Iowa's always been up here kind of poking around. Iowa State a little bit always poking around. But, Wisconsin knows what they're doing. The guys they got there going to be really good. Minnesota, PJ Fleck is not. They're not going to probably win a national championship in Minnesota, but PJ Fleck is a pretty good recruiter, and they've been up here way more than they ever were under the Jerry Kill or Tim Brewster era. I mean, Brewster was incompetent when it came to recruiting
the upper Midwest.
Ignored it. Yep. Fleck, for whatever you think of PJ Fleck, they're up here. They're up here poking around, recruiting kids. They got the kid out of West Fargo a couple years ago.
Was it Carter Menz?
Carter Menz.
Yeah,
yep.
Cole Menz, his brother's here. Yep. Carter Menz is there. And then on top of that.
And some of that, PJ Fleck saying F you to Matt Entz, because I think there's maybe a little friction there for various reasons.
Potentially.
But the point is that the Gophers are not ignoring North Dakota anymore.
And they're probably getting more Minnesota kids that maybe NDSU got in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That
for sure.
And the other thing is maybe that'll change now that he's at Alabama and he probably has access to another level of recruit. But when Kalen DeBoer is at Washington, Elenius Davis, not that he's North Dakota, but he's from,
Moorhead.
And then even Lincoln Kindholz started, initially committed to Washington before he ended up at Ohio State. So now NDSU finds themselves competing against those type of programs, or like
it's going to be hard to win a recruiting battle against Kansas State. If Kansas State wants a kid and offers him a scholarship, it's going to be hard to win that battle. And that Kansas State was never up here before Chris Kleiman and Connor Riley and all those guys went down to Manhattan.
And I think NIL even amplifies it. Maybe in the past you could, especially like you could tell an Easton Stick, who I think had like a Rutgers offer.
Yep.
Well, you can get to the NFL from here. Maybe Rutgers is a bad example, because I don't know if they have like a huge. But now you got the NIL. It's not just like getting to the NFL. Well, we can get to the NFL too, but we're going to give you $50,000 or $100,000 a year in the meantime before you get there. And I think that's. And that's where, like, I know what the FCS coaches are doing, and that's what they got to say. You can get anywhere from here, but yeah, you can still do that, but the NIL just adds another layer of stuff that's just hard. It's going to be harder and harder to compete with.
No doubt. And the transfer portal, we've hammered that time and time again, but that's another thing that just, it's just going to be difficult for all FCS schools, all of them, not certain ones, but all of them are just going to have a tough time keeping, especially linemen, going forward, because schools just want those kids. So anybody stand out specifically, talking to the kids, talking to your sources, anybody stand out specifically that you kind of go, yeah, I mean, this kid's a pretty good get for North Dakota State?
I mean, other than the 3 stars we talked about, I mean, this guy just intrigues me because of his size. I think he's 6'5", 240. Gabriel Cunningham out of the St. Louis area.
Tight end.
Tight end. And I just think, since Noah Gindorf and Josh Babbage left, I mean, Joe Stuffel's a good tight end. They just haven't had that like bigger body tight end for a couple years. Yep. And he interests me. I think and from talking to him, he sounds like he's more of a pass catching type tight end, a guy you can flex out. I'm not saying he's as good as this, like a Travis Kelce type style of play. Like he ain't gonna. I'm not saying
he's not necessarily a road grader.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, NDSU was blessed for a lot of years by having kids like Gindorf, Babbage, guys like that, who are both road graders in the run game and were athletic and fast enough to get open and catch the ball.
I mean, you had one year Noah Gindorf, Josh Babbage, and Ben Elson. Will that ever? I mean, and then not to mention they had 5 of their top 6 guys on that offensive line were in the NFL. I mean, they'll never say never.
Never's a long time,
but would be hard pressed.
Yep.
Along with Christian Watson, Trey Lance, and Hunter Lippke.
Right.
But anyway, I just think they just haven't had that bigger body tight end, and that interests me, and especially with this pass catching ability. And another thing, you want to talk about the tight end angle, I think one of the things is more of the bigger programs are starting to use tight ends again. For a while, I think when NDSU was plucking guys like Babbage and Gindorf I think did have an offer from U of M.
I think so, yeah.
But it's still out there, but a lot of these big-time college programs are just running strictly spread. So they just wanted all wide receivers. Yep. They weren't looking at fullbacks like NDSU's plucked. They weren't looking at tight ends. Now I think people are using tight ends. Well, we can use a tight end in a 5-receiver set, put them in the slot, and then what are you going to put on them? You're going to put a little D-back on them, or are you going to put... So I think some of the bigger programs are moving back to let's get the stud tight end and maybe employ him differently than the inline road graders. So maybe they won't get those type of players as much anymore either.
And we don't know the answer to the question I'm about to ask, but it's going to be interesting to see how Tim Polasek and his staff, if they recruit differently in terms of what Polasek and Jake Landry want to do offensively, what their vision is for NDSU's offense. And then defensively now with Grant Olson, the defensive coordinator, I don't know if at the FCS level if you can be that specific or if you just go find the best players you can. But I get the sense from talking to Polasek at the spring game that he did. I'm not going to say he didn't like, but he was a little bit surprised at what NDSU's offense was last year. It wasn't the classic, we're going to line up, if it's 3rd and 3, we are going to run the ball 99 times out of 100, and if you stop us, fine. We're going to run it again on 4th down and 1. NDSU last year, whether it was personnel, whether it was directives from the head coach, whether it was the offensive coordinator, I don't know, but they became a different offense last year than they had been historically. And I think it caught some people by surprise, sort of not, I don't mean in a bad way or a good way, but just like a surprise way. I remember talking with Adam Bach, South Dakota State's middle linebacker, before the Jackrabbits game last year on a group call. And Adam, somebody asked him, like, what do you see when you see NDSU? Same old Bison? And Adam kind of went, well, they don't really look like the Bison that we've known. He goes, it's fine, it's working for them, but they just don't look the same with some of the things. And they're running 5 wide. They're trying to run out of 4 wide. They're just doing some different things that we hadn't seen out of NDSU. So I want to see what Polsek and Landry do offensively, and whether they're recruiting, whether they can be that specific in trying to set up what they want to do.
To your point, I think they got back to the power run game more after that South Dakota State loss, and that's when they kind of went on that streak. At Montana State specifically, they just ran the ball at them. I think they kind of got back to their identity a little bit last year, later in the season, and that led to their success. I know, to your point, a couple of years ago, one of the social media crazes when they had like a play where they had like 4 or 5 fullbacks on the field. Yep. We didn't really see that last year. Let me tie something up on Cunningham. He's another 3-star guy, and he had 41 catches for 742 yards and 12 touchdowns as a junior. And he was he made the St. Louis Dispatch all like metro area team. So sounds like a pretty good level prospect. But back to your point. I think knowing Tim Polsek and knowing how the offense ran when he was here, I would see would be more power run game, more of the A-gap power, as they like to call it.
I will always go back to the Sam Houston State playoff game in 2014, 2015, something like that. Don't remember what it was. But North Dakota State ran A-gap power, I think it was 8 times in a row in the third quarter. And I was in the press box at the Fargo Dome, and Polsek was the offensive coordinator, and he was standing up, pounding the glass in the Fargo Dome, screaming, "Run it again! Run it again!" And they kept lining up and ran the same play 8 times in a row. And I think it was Crockett, so it had to be, maybe it was 13 or 14. But they just killed Sam Houston State. And the only reason they stopped was because the third quarter ended. Yes. And, but it was... I envision NDSU's offense doing that a lot this year if they can. Just running more power and being more NDSU-y than they were maybe at times last year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like it didn't work. I mean, NDSU scored a lot of points last year, and it's kind of like, I'm sure that you got to a point where they had a stretch where you have guys like Christian Watson and some of these type wide receivers. Well, we got to get that guy involved. So maybe that, that kind of led to him, starting to maybe expand. And I still think you got to be multiple. I don't think you can just line it up and have 2 or 3 tight ends. I mean, I still think that we're going to see 3 or 4 or 5.
South Dakota State learned how to stop that.
Yep.
NDSU has not run the ball against South Dakota State well for like 6 years. No. 5 years.
You can't just do 3 or 4 yards of the cloud of dust anymore. I think you do have to be multiple. But to your point, I think overall, he was an offensive line coach. I think Tim Polsek wants to have a dominant offensive line. He wants to be able to run the ball, and even be able to run the ball when they want to run the ball. Like, right, all right, it's 3rd and 4. We're going to run it. We're going to run it, and you're not going to stop it. I think that's kind of what he's going to want, the identity. But I still think you need the variety, some of the, I think we'll see other sets. I just don't think we'll see as many of the 4 or 5 wide stuff as maybe we saw last year. And maybe I'm wrong, but that would just be my inkling at this point.
Yep. All right, we got to wrap it up. We're way past my self-imposed deadline. So Eric Peterson, thank you. Appreciate the discussion as always. We'll do it again. Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
Yep. Eric Peterson on the McFeely Mess podcast here at inform.com. Thanks for listening. A lot of football talk, but I needed it because things aren't going well in my other passion. One of my other passions in life and in writing and reporting. I need some lighthearted stuff. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess Podcast at inforum.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inforum.com and search Mike McFeely